I'll be right back.
Cool. All right, that's gonna be, before we start, since I already have this. All right, I'm gonna do that every time, except I'm gonna change it out next time. I'm gonna use a different one. I have a lot. I think I have like 20 of these things. All right, so overview of today's lesson. We're just gonna do a quick review. We'll go through the SBTs and then just quickly go over recurve and barebow again. Today is going to be really about the foundation of your shot. So that's your stance, your nock, your hook and grip, and your set. So it's really important to build a strong foundation because that's like kind of what you base your shot off of. If you don't have a strong foundation, it's really easy to kind of mess up later on in your shot. And I didn't put it down here, but we're also going to go over Compound and Bowhunter a little bit. Okay, so last time we went over SBTs. Again, they're just archery exercises, specifically archery exercises that you can do, and they kind of mimic archery. You can actually do them with a bow if you want. So they're very good to increase your endurance, your strength, flexibility, and your alignment. Again, with the endurance one, you're basically just holding a full draw a bunch of times for a long period of time. The shot generally will take 6 seconds, somewhere around six to 7 seconds. From the time you're down here and you start your shot and you come up and you get up here and you get ready and you shoot, that should be about 6 seconds. So holding a full draw for 30 to 60 seconds, that's a long time. So that's to build endurance so that you can kind of learn to build your muscles and get that feeling of holding the shot for a longer time. Even though we don't really do this, it'll help you build endurance. So you do that a bunch of times. Just follow what's on the slide. And then strength. Strength is going from setup, which is this position where you haven't drawn yet, all the way back into anchor. And then you come back up into setup and then back. And you do that a bunch of times. And this one you're not holding as long. So you're constantly working these muscles, working that muscle over and over and over repeatedly in a short period of time. And then hopefully that will build your strength in your shot so that you can start to draw more weight. And structure was one of the simpler ones where you kind of just draw back behind your head like that, and then that kind of lines up everything back here so that back here it feels straight. And the idea is to line up all the bones from here all the way down to the back shoulder and getting that feel of proper alignment. Flexibility SBT is something that kind of we are going to learn later on. So it's not really that big of an issue to learn right now or to figure out. Basically, you kind of come back up in here into anchor. And then you do what's called expansion, which is an opening of your chest. Basically, you're kind of going open like that, but it's not as visual or visible. And then you kind of expand past where you would normally expand, and then release. All right, we also went over the parts of a recurve. This is a basic recurve bow. So this applies to bare bow and recurve. You've got the riser, you got the two limbs. The limbs are where you really control like the poundage that you pull. You've got the string, and that's like the basic recurve. You'll usually have a rest. And then for like an Olympic recurve, you would add on stabilizers and you would add on a sight. All right. So I think I'm going to do this every time. We'll just do a quick overview of all the steps of NTS, and then we'll go into like the specific steps that we want to talk about today. So again, you've seen these slides before. NTS is a national training system, and it's just like a way so that you can easily repeat a shot over and over and still be able to you want to be able to shoot a shot as efficiently as possible so that you're not tired after shooting 100 arrows. Okay, so stance is kind of basically how you stand, and how you stand can be important because you don't want things, outside influences like wind or the weight of the bow, or like the physical weight of the bow, not how much you draw, like how heavy the bow is, to be able to affect affect your balance during your shot. So like you like leaning back and falling in the middle of a shot is probably not the best thing because you're moving. So it's important for stance. Nock, loading an arrow properly, is always important. You want to make sure everything's good on the bow before you start your shot. Hook and grip, I see this every time. It's like the only 2 points of the bow that you're touching the bow, and you're affecting how the bow is aimed. So the hook and grip are really important. Set is basically you're preparing your shot. You're prepared mentally and physically to shoot this, to start and shoot the shot. Setup is like the beginning of your shot. That's when you start to raise your bow up and you're setting the alignment of the barrel of the gun from the front here to the back here. And you're lining everything up and you're tightening your core. Draw to load, that's when you actually start to pull the bow back towards your face. This is the part where you're using the most force, and you're using your back muscles as much as possible. Anchor is when you bring your face or your hand to your face. You're creating as many connections as possible so that your shot's more repeatable. Transfer to hold is when you take when you're drawing back, you're using a lot of muscles, your back muscles and some arm muscles to kind of get everything into position. Once you're in transferring to hold, that means you're transferring all that extra tension in your muscles into your bone structure, so that like you might be like tense here and here in your arms as you draw back, but once you're up here, you kind of like settle everything in, everything kind of like settles into your bones. And that's basically transfer to hold. Expansion is continuing that motion backwards because you're always drawing back with the bow. You're never stopped or coming forward. So you want to make sure you continually expand. And then when you're ready, you release and follow through. Follow through is just a kind of the result of your release. So if you release properly, your hand should come straight back. And then feedback is you think over how the shot went, you make any improvements that you think you need to make, or you, psych yourself up for the next shot, and then you just move on to the next shot. Okay, so we're going to go into it in detail today. We're going to focus on stance, knock, hook and grip, and set. Okay, so you're building the foundation of your shot. There's kind of like 4 big steps, in my opinion, to your shot. One's building the foundation. That's these 4 steps. There's setting up the shot. So that's basically set up all the way through to holding. And then there's executing your shot. So once you're up here, that's the release and the follow through. And then, well, it's the release. And then completing the shot, which is the follow through and the feedback. Okay, so today we're going to focus on the foundation of the shot. And that's stance, knock, hooks, hook and grip, and set. So we're going to start with stance. Stance is an archer's foundation. It's like the very basis of your balance. So it's really important because you don't want to be like moving back and forth or front and back during your shot. You want to be nice and strong and immovable so that when wind comes or you're getting tired or like there's rain, then you're strong, you're solid, and you're not going to move around. So I believe Hugh talked about some of this during his practice session. The keys to stance basically are you want to have your feet open towards the target. We prefer an open stance, which is the stance down here. And you want to place the weight on the balls of your feet. So we say 60-40. So you want to have a little bit of weight. Just if you're standing, if you're standing flat-footed, you just want to have a little bit of weight forwards. So you kind of move forwards just a little bit so that you have weight on your feet. So if you look down here, I think, there we go. It's not working out. There we go. Okay, so let's have a shooting line. All right, so this is a shooting line. You want to have your feet shoulder width apart, and I don't know what I'm aiming at. Should have prepared this better. Okay, that's better. So that's the arrow right here is the shooting line. Your feet should be about shoulder width apart. And ignore my knees because they bend backwards. You want to lock your knees, but mine hyperextend and they go backwards. So just ignore the grossness of that. It's actually not that bad when you don't see the top half, as you don't see the top half. But okay, your feet are open towards the target. So that means if your feet are parallel with a line, your front foot should be just like a little bit further back, like that. And it's basically like in this picture right here. My front foot or my back foot is here parallel to the line. You can turn it a little bit. You can turn it this way a little bit. You can turn it towards the target a little bit. But generally you want it parallel. And then the front foot is slightly back and slightly turned out. Boom. So this is a square stance where both feet are parallel. And that's pretty easy to understand. And then open, it's just that front foot turned out a little bit. And the reason why we call it open stance is because it opens up your chest a little bit to the target. So if I'm standing, if the camera's the target, and I'm standing with the square stance, my chest is very straight towards the target, right? An open stance opens up my chest a little bit. It turns me away so that when I come up and I have a string here, it gives me a little bit more room here to move everything around. So my string won't catch on my chest. Now, one of the reasons that we do an open stance also is because it helps with your balance. With a square stance, you have good balance kind of going this way, front and back towards the target and away from the target. So you have wind, you have like a tailwind or a headwind. So wind going this direction or wind going this direction. You're pretty stout. You're pretty steady because your feet are keeping you balanced. But standing square, if there's wind coming in this direction or from the left or to the right, then the wind's going to push me forwards or backwards fairly easily, because the only thing stopping me from going forwards and backwards are my toes, really, and my heels. And like if you get pushed back onto your heels, it's really hard to balance that way. So when you open up your stance, it kind of gives you more stability, because your back foot gives you more front and back stability, but this foot gives you a little bit of stability when you have winds coming in from the side. So kind of that's really the important bit about stance. It gives you a really good foundation, and it helps. It's pretty much the basis of your balance. Are there any questions about stance before I move on? Most people get stance very quickly. It's generally second nature, because when you're standing, you generally stand with your feet shoulder width apart, and it's not that hard to like move your front foot back a little bit and opening and then just like turning that foot out. And most people just stand like that naturally. But it's important. That's why we kind of go over it. It's why we talk about it, or else how would you know that, standing in the same spot is really important. It's so important, in fact, that like if you go to outdoor tournaments and you watch people shoot, eventually they'll stand in the same position so much they'll wear grooves into the grass. So you'll see like little indents of feet in the grass. So like people just like put their feet in those spots. So it's really important, because if you stand in a different place, it will change how you hit the target. Okay, no questions. We're gonna move on to Nock. Another picture? No. All right, so Nock, you basically want to, let me grab my bow. Where did I put that arrow? Oh, it's over. All right. So I shoot a compound now. So this is a compound. You want to hold the bow vertically like this when you're loading, because if you turn it to the side, you'll notice that like the bow goes out to the side, right? So you have people standing in front of you and behind you. So if you have like a recurve bow, which is much longer than this, and you turn your bow to the side, you're going to hit everybody around you. So you want to hold your bow straight up and down. For a compound, you kind of rest it in your hip, like that. And then for a recurve, they're really tall, so you can kind of like just rest it on your foot here, like that. But you're going to take an arrow. This is an arrow. So this is an arrow. This is Ernest's arrow, if you guys recognize it. This is a carbon arrow. It's a pretty fat arrow. It's designed for indoors. I think this is as fat as you can get for indoors. An outdoor arrow is much thinner because you want it to fly better in the wind and you want it to fly further. But indoors is only 18 meters. So if you shoot a fat arrow, it doesn't really matter that much. And a fat arrow actually helps because it hits more surface area on the target, so you have more chance of hitting a line, which counts as a higher score. So that's what they do in indoor tournaments. They shoot fat arrows to try to get more score. All right. Anyways, so in order to load an arrow, you want to put your arrow. Basically, I have a shoot-through riser. A lot of risers are open right here. So this metal piece isn't here, but I have a shoot-through one, so I have to kind of thread it through first. Otherwise, you can just go like that and then put it on. But have to get it into this area. And you basically just put the back end of your arrow right there. Let's turn it right there. You want to put the back end of your arrow, and you see that the arrow nock has a little notch like that. And what it'll do is it'll clip onto the back of the string or onto the string right there. And it'll hold itself onto the string. And then after that, you put the arrow on the arrow rest like that, and it's ready, and it's loaded and ready to go. So it's really important to have the nock, or not the nock, the fletching, index fletching facing the right direction. The index fletching is like a fletching it's not different, but a lot of times it's a different color. This one's not. But for our compound, you generally want one of the fletchings facing straight up. And for recurves, you want it facing out away from the riser. So it would be facing this direction instead, rather than up. But you want to make sure that when you nock an arrow, this is the important part. Learning how to nock an arrow is really easy. But what you want to do is you want to do it the same every time. That's what's really important. So as you can see here on these slides, or on these pictures, right here, there's a fletching facing to the left away from the bow. And then on the compound, they have the different colored feather fletching facing up. So you want that to be the same every time. For compound, it's a little bit easier because you typically just put it into this spot right here in between the little loop. But on recurve, oh, that's interesting. This is wrong. This nock locator, this little thing right here, this blurry little blob actually should be up above the arrow. Should be up here. But recurvers will put two, one above and one below, so that it's easier to put it into the same spot every time. That's really important because if your arrow were a little bit lower than normal, or a little bit higher than normal, when it's on the string, it's going to fly off differently. So that's why, I think that's why nock is one of the steps to shooting. Because making sure your arrow is properly loaded is actually really important. Okay. Yeah. So that's why nock is important. You just want to do it the same every time. Make sure that you visually check that everything's in the right place, because if it's not, then bad things can happen. For example, if you load your arrow and your arrow is sitting on top of this plunger, this is a basically a spring that pushes against your arrow. If it's sitting on top of this thing, then it's not going to fly properly because it's not pushing against the spring anymore. And it'll fly way off. I've done it a lot, more than I want to admit. And you're basically have no idea where the arrow is going to go, other than it's going to go high. So nocking, visually checking your arrow is really important. Make sure everything's in the right spot. Okay, hook and grip. This is kind of going to be the meat and potatoes of this, I believe. All those. Okay, so hook and grip. It's called a hook and grip because you always do the hook first and then you do your grip. The reason for that is if you do the grip first and then you go to do your hook, it's really easy to lose the grip. So you want to always do the hook first. Okay, let's see. You basically, if you have your finger tab, you wear a finger tab. This is a finger tab. It looks like this. It's basically two pieces of leather that's attached to a metal backing to kind of give it structure. This is a fancier one, so it looks nicer, but it's basically two pieces of leather that you put over your fingers to protect your fingers. And then this goes, the string goes right here, right there, like that. Wrap it around. Sorry, this is upside down, but I want to show you. Like that. And then it goes around the string. And it slides, basically helps your fingers slide off more quickly. And it protects your fingers from the string. Okay, let's see. Hook and grip. For recurve, it's the first joint around the finger. Oops, the thing went backwards. There we go. So it's like right there, like that. See the joints of my fingers right here. Let me flip this. Maybe that will help. Okay, so you see the joints of my fingers, like right there and right there. So it's going to be right there for me. Like it looks a lot where it looks like a lot more in the picture, but I have a really long middle finger, so it extends out really far. So right there, string is basically just right there on the tips of my fingers, right there. Then if you use a release, where's my release? If you use a release, this is a release aid for compounds. You just take a pretty deep grip of the release. So I'll have like, it's on my second knuckles. And then this is the trigger. So you basically do that to trigger the release. Okay. Okay. So now that you have the hook, you want to hold the grip properly. So it's similar to what we talked about before. You want the grip to go down right here. As you can see in the picture, like right here, down towards your wrist, like that. Okay, that's where you want the grip to sit. And your hand is all the way up into the pivot point, all the way up in here, nice and snug. And then the palm of your hand is pushing into the pressure point of the bow. So it's kind of, this is where the grip is, and then it's all the way down into it, or up into it. So fingers on the string, then you adjust your grip. Then you want to have a little bit of tension on the bow. So a little bit of tension kind of keeps everything in place. Whereas if everything's nice and, if there's no tension on it, it's really easy to like accidentally let something slip or let something move out of place. So you want to always have a little bit of tension, not a lot. So like this is no tension. So like just a little bit and it goes down, right? So that's like no tension. And then you just want a little bit more tension like that. So you're maybe drawing the bow like a half an inch or an inch. So you have, step back. So hook, set your grip, a little bit of tension on the bow. And that's all you really need to do. The little fingers of your grip, you can kind of just curl them up a little bit. Depending on what you're shooting, if you don't shoot with a finger sling, you're gonna hold your bow. If you shoot with a finger sling, you won't be holding your bow. A sling basically catches your bow after you shoot it. In archery, we don't actually hold on to the bow. As you can see in these pictures here, right there, they're not really, where's my mouse? They're not really holding on to the bow. This is a compound. They're not really holding on to the bow either. So you'll see a sling of some kind. This person has a finger sling right here. This person has a wrist sling. And what it does is it catches the bow when it jumps out of their hand. I'll pull up a video later to show what that looks like. Anything after that? No. Okay. Any questions about that? I don't know if that was like particularly clear, but just a quick review. The important parts is put the string on your fingertips. So like for recurve, it's just past the first joint. For compound, using a release aid, you're going to take a deeper grip. So you're going to wrap more around, probably to the second knuckle. And you want your hand to be in the same position every time. So as you can see here, this person's using a 3 fingers under hook. So their 3 fingers are right there, directly underneath the arrow. If the placement of your hook isn't consistent, your arrows aren't going to fly consistent. So this person shoots one time with his fingers here, and then the next time there's a little bit of a gap between his index finger and the arrow, then it'll cause the arrow to fly differently. So like when I say archery is all about consistency, it is really all about consistency. Just doing the same thing, making sure everything's the same, like putting everything into the same spot every time. And that's really what gives, makes an archer consistent in their shots. And then once you have consistency and your arrows are all going in the same spot, it's really easy to move it. It's not that easy, but it's fairly simple to move your arrows into the spot where you want them to go. It's getting that consistency that's the hard part. Yeah, so that's the hook. You just want to make sure that you put your fingers on the string in the same spot. And then you have a little bit of tension. And then you put your hands into the grip properly. Remember, the grip is going to go right here, right up in there, right there. Yeah. And the idea behind the grip really is to get your wrist behind the bow. I think I can see it in the picture. Yeah, pictures of them. Okay, so you can see that the bow grip goes directly into this person's wrist back here. So it's going, that pressure goes right here into the arm, rather than if it's off to the side and it's just pulling into your thumb, and that just kind of like can damage your thumb over time. So you want to make sure that you use your bone structure, that that pressure goes into the bone structure, the force goes into the bone structure, and gives you a stronger jaw. And it's also really important in this spot to put your hand in the same spot every time. You want to push your hand all the way up into the pivot point of the grip, and then you want your hand, the bottom of your hand, pushing into the riser. Yeah, because sometimes people will just kind of push their hand forward and lift their palm off. But yeah, any questions about hook and grip? Whoa, time went quick. Okay. Set. Set is where you straighten your back. This is where you stand straight up and down. A lot of people think that standing straight means you puff out your chest, you lift your chest up. What that does, unfortunately, is it actually curls your back. It arches your back like that. See that? She's lifted her chest up, so now her back isn't straight. Whereas, let me see, let me stand here. If I lift my chest up, my back is arched. There. But if you lower your chest, the back is straighter. You want as little arch in your back as possible. So when you're standing straight up and down, really you just kind of breathe out, kind of slouch a little bit, keep that chest down, tighten your ab muscles, and that is what we want. Nice straight back when you're shooting. Now lower your shoulders as much as possible, and then you straighten the front arm. Pronate your arm means you straighten the arm and you rotate the elbow like that, so that your arm bends this way rather than if it were angled up like that, it bends up this way. So basically want your arm turned so that the elbow faces this direction. That way your arm bends this way. What this does is it gives you more room right here. It removes the bottom part of your arm out of the way of the string. So if I went like normal, this little chunk of arm sticks out. But if I pronate and I rotate it, it moves out of the way. Now, that's one of the more difficult things to learn in archery because it's not something that people normally do. So one of the ways you can do it is to kind of push up against the wall and kind of work that arm so that you can turn and maintain this this rotation of your arm without the shoulder coming up. So again, for set, you're basically standing straight up and down. Then you breathe out, let your chest settle, chest down. Abs are going to be engaged. and then your shoulders are as far down as they can go. Your hook and grip is good, and then you pronate that arm. So this is basically all the steps. You do the stance, you stand. My target's going to be right there. You're going to stand with an open stance, one foot slightly behind, or your front foot slightly behind the back foot. And then you're going to knock your arrow properly. You're going to hook the string. You're going to set your grip properly. Have a little bit of tension right there. And then you're going to settle everything down, stand nice and straight. And then keep that front arm nice and straight, front arm straight. Rotate that bow arm. And then you're ready for your shot. Set also includes, I don't know if this slide has it, or if this, there's another, no, okay. So set also means mindset. So once you're at this point and you're ready to begin your shot, you focus on the shot. You change your mindset so that you go, okay, I'm going to shoot my mind. I'm ready. I'm going to shoot this shot. I'm not going to let anything distract me. So you focus on your shot. So you're setting your mindset as well for your shot. And then after that, you're ready to begin. So all of that was the foundation. Like that's everything you need to do to get ready to begin your shot. Like that's a lot of information. And he's going to go over a bunch with you tomorrow. But yeah, that's the basic foundation of an archery shot: stance, knock, hook and grip, and set. Any questions? This is a slide from last time, but like, how do you tell you're doing it properly? You film yourself. You use mirrors. Using a mirror, doing stretch band work. I almost always do stretch band work in front of a mirror because you want to see what's going on. You want to be able to kind of turn and look and see what's happening so that you're not repeating mistakes that then become habit, because it's really hard to break a habit once you start it. So you always want to make sure that you practice in front of a mirror, or if you film yourself so that you can tell if something doesn't look right. Like the major things that you look out for really is make sure that you have a straight line from here to the front hand, right? And then you want to make sure you're bringing this hand to the same spot every time. And you're standing properly and you're making sure you're standing straight, because it's hard to tell sometimes. Film yourself. You can do that. You can look at different angles that you normally wouldn't be able to see in front of a mirror. Ask a coach to watch you. Coaches can catch smaller things that you're not used to looking for. So talking to a coach, like telling them what the shot feels like, where you think things are going weird, can help a lot. And a coach can definitely help with like minor tweaks to your form. And then use a training aid. Use like a stretch band in front of the mirror, a string bow. There's like a lot of different things that you can use to help you train your shot. There's like other types of stretch bands. There's like weights. There's a lot of different devices. Can't go into them all, but mostly stretch band in front of a mirror helps a ton. Okay, we're gonna go into compounds. So let's see. Not sure if I showed that previous slide. I think this is the same slide as last time. These are the advantages of a compound. Basically, they have wheels and cams. That's these two things on the top and the bottom here. They basically rotate, and they have like weird grooves, and they're weirdly shaped. These are cams. So that when you draw them back, at some point, it lets off the weight. What does that mean? Let off basically means, if you look at this chart here, this right here is kind of what a normal recurve draw force curve looks like. As you draw further back, it gets heavier. It's pretty simple, right? A compound is different. A compound will start off down here and then very quickly go up into the top end of their poundage. So like this one's looks like a 50-pound bow. So it'll quickly go up into 50 pounds. But before you draw all the way back, it'll let down the weight. It'll let off some of the weight. A lot of times it's 65, 75%. So if you're holding, if you have like a 60-pound bow, you're really only holding about 10 to 12 pounds at full draw. So for a recurve, if you're at full draw and you have a 40-pound bow, you're holding 40 pounds on your fingers back here while you're trying to aim and while you're trying to get through your shot, 40 pounds like this. But compound, you're back here and you're only holding 12 pounds, which is a lot lighter, and you're able to kind of control much better. And you don't have to like be as concerned about muscle fatigue when you're shooting. And the wheels also let you have, or the cams also allow you to have a wall. What a wall is, let's compare to recurve. Recurve, the further back you draw, the heavier it gets. You can continue to draw back as far as you want, basically until the bow breaks, right? For a compound, it's different. For a compound, it eventually hits what's called a wall, and it's basically the cams stop rotating at a certain point. And that's usually set at your draw length. So once you draw it back, it stops. So then once it stops, you just maintain pressure against that wall and you get into your shot and then you shoot. That's a huge benefit, because with the recurve, sometimes if you're not consistent, you don't really know if you've drawn exactly the right distance back, especially with a bare bow, because there's no tool to kind of tell you how far you've drawn back. So you really don't know how far you've drawn back with a bare bow. And in for recurves, there's like a little tool that tells you. It's called a clicker. Basically clicks when you reach a certain distance, but it's not the same as a wall. Wall, you pull back, if you hit that wall, as long as you're maintaining that pressure against the wall, you've drawn back, 27.75 inches, which is your perfect drawing. And it makes everything way more consistent. You're also allowed to use a release. This is a release aid. You essentially attach a release to a little loop on the string, and then you pull back on the string, on the release aid, and the release aid pulls back the string. And then when you're at full draw, you can hit the trigger and it releases for you. And you don't have to, it pretty much ignores the inconsistencies of like letting the string go with your fingers. So that's also a huge benefit. and it reduces Archer's paradox. If we have time later, I'll talk about Archer's paradox. It's basically how the arrow bends when it comes out of a bow. So for bow hunters, you have short stabilizers, about 12 inches, I believe, and you have no magnification on your sight. You are allowed sights, but no magnification. It's basically the restrictions of a bow hunter. It's basically using a compound bow with a short front stabilizer like this and no magnification. Compound, there's no restrictions on stabilizer length. The front stabilizer back here can be as long as you want. They're generally about 30 inches. No, that's a lot. Somewhere between 25 to 30 inches usually. And you get to use a magnified lens, which is beneficial, but it's not as beneficial as you would expect, I think. I think you can do just as well with no magnification in most cases. You really only see the benefit at like the really top level. So recap of how do I choose a bow? Basically, try them. Once you get a chance, try out every bow type. The compound and bow hunters are really similar. Typically, bow hunters people will start off as bow hunter and then move on to compound like the next year or two. Recurve and bare bow, you see less of a switch from bare bow to recurve because they're different enough where once you get used to one, you kind of want to stick to it. So I would try recurve, bare bow, and bow hunter at least, and then see how you like it, and go from there. If you want to do the Olympics, you're going to have to do recurve. If you want to do hunting, a lot of times that's going to be bow hunter. Traditional, that's more of like a bare bow thing. And then if you want to have fun, that's kind of opens you up to everything. Which one feels the best when you shoot it? Like, do you want to challenge? Do you want to just have fun shooting? You want to do something that's simple and you don't have to worry too much about it? Then use that kind of to decide you on what to shoot. Though people may talk to you to get you to switch to something if we are in need of a certain bow type, but whatever you want to do. Here's a slide on poundage. Basically, you want to start off on a low poundage when you first start. For recurve, like that's like about 15, 16 pounds, maybe like 18 if you're more athletic. But you want to start up low. Compound, you can start up a little bit higher just because of how the let-off works. But you want to move up slowly, about 2 pounds every couple of weeks. This is assuming you're shooting regularly in practice, like at least like 3 times a week. If you're not shooting as much, then it's going to be very hard to move up in poundage. So it is a sport. You do need to build your strength for this sport. So you do want to practice as much as possible if you're trying to go up in poundage. So if you are practicing regularly, a couple pounds every 2 weeks will get you kind of closer to around this time. And then you want to gradually slow down and move up a little bit less because once you're up into like, you're 35 pounds, going from 35 to 37 is a big jump. Whereas if you're at like 15, going from 15 to 17 isn't as bad. Because in general, people are strong enough for that. All right. 9:03. Okay. This actually went longer than I thought it would. Any questions? No? No questions? Is everybody awake? Yeah, you can stop recording.